All right, so let's get this kicked off. All right. So my thing is this. All right, and this is how I feel. All right, let me get my timer ready. Okay, and this is how I feel. It's that the problem with Mr. Research, okay, is that he has this habit, all right, of blame. What he'll do is he'll sit there, and he'll blame other people for things that go wrong, but he'll never blame himself. And that's what my problem with it is. Okay? That's what my problem with it is. And it's that, okay, Mr. Research, he does things in his life and he goes places, and when things don't work out in the places that he goes, it's the people's that are their fault. It's their fault. It's never his fault. Okay, he sold dope when he was a teenager, but that was Ronald Reagan's fault. Okay, it wasn't his fault. Okay, he went to Atlanta and failed in Atlanta, but somehow it was it was black women's fault. And the fact that black women don't have a culture, that's whose fault it was. Okay, it was never his fault. You see what I'm saying? It was never his fault. It's always somebody else's fault, and I have a big issue with that. I mean, I have a big problem with that. Why is everything other people's fault and never his fault? You know what I mean? You know what I mean? Why is everything is always other people's fault, and it's never um Mr. Researcher's fault? Okay, it's always somebody else's fault. Okay, and the thing is, okay, because I believe that Mr. Research was in Atlanta in the late 90s, early 2000s. Whenever he recounts that story, it's always late 90s, early 2000s. Okay. And how should I say it? Okay. Whenever he tells these stories, okay, it's okay. He went to Atlanta and he was a young black man, young black man in the career world. He had his I guess by that time he had some of his management. I don't know if he had his management certifications or whatever at that time. I assume he did, or at least he may have had some of them at that time. Okay. So he had his management certification and whatnot in hand. Okay. And okay, and he goes to the city of Atlanta. Okay, and at that time he was working in medical finance. But what's interesting is whenever he describes himself career-wise, he always says that he works in medical finance, even though he hasn't worked in medical finance in years. Okay, Mr. Research hasn't worked in medical finance in years. You know what I mean? He hasn't worked in that field in years. But he'll tell you, I mean, Mr. Research will tell you, okay, that when he talks about his career, and he talks about where he works, or, he'll say, well, I work in medical finance. I work in medical finance. But he hasn't worked in medical finance in years. He works in tech now. Okay, he's not a programmer or anything, but he's a manager over employees at a tech company. Okay, he works in tech now, but he never talks about tech. But he only talks about medical finance. You see what I'm saying? He only talks about he only describes himself, as being medical finance. So that's how I know he has some sort of I guess he has some sort of reason why he only wants to describe himself as being in that field, even though he's not in that field. Okay. But in the early 2000s, it's presumed that he was still working in medical finance. Okay. And he describes a story where he says that he went to a hospital, some hospital that he applied in. Okay. He applied for some position to work in the billing department of one of the larger, I assume, hospitals in Atlanta. All right. All right, and that's how he describes the story. All right. That's how he describes the story. And what he says is that when he went to this job interview at this hospital, okay, he says that the hiring board at the hospital, okay, now this is what he said now. This is what he said. Okay. He said that the hiring board at the hospital that he wanted to work at, okay, that it was all black women on this hiring board. Now, I never had a chance to ask him what age group those black women were, if they were Generation X or were they boomers. But the way he describes it, he describes these were older black women and that they were boomers. That's the way he describes it. I don't think these were Generation X women. Okay. And Mr. Research tells a tale and a story Okay. All right. And in this tale and in this story, okay, what he does is he says that these black women on this hiring board didn't hire him, and instead they hired another black woman. Instead, behind him, he said that there was another black woman that they interviewed that he says had less experience than him. Okay. And he says that they hired her instead. He says that they told him, all right, that he says that they told him that he was over, or that he was overqualified for the position. And he claims that there's no such thing as being overqualified. But he says that they told him that he was overqualified for the position. And that's the reason why they hired the black women over hiring him. Now, what Mr. Research does is he goes on to say, okay, he goes on to say that what he says is that the reason the black women that that were on this hiring board did not hire him is because they don't have a culture. Okay, that's what he says. He says because black women in America, in the United States, don't have a culture. So that's why they didn't hire him. And he proceeds to say that had I been an Indian man, if I was an Indian man or something like that, and there were Indian women on that hiring board, those Indian women would have hired me based on the fact that I'm an Indian man. Okay. Now, this is what he says. This is what comes out of his mouth. This is what he says. This is what Mr. Research says. This is what he believes. Okay. He believes had he been an Indian man, okay, he would have got hired to the position if he had been an Indian man. Okay. All right, now this is what he says. Okay. This is what he says now. All right. And with this story is very similar to a lot of the other stories Mr. Research tells. Okay. It's Mr. Research goes and does something, or Mr. Research goes somewhere and it doesn't go in his favor, and it's their fault. It's these people's fault. Or it's black people's fault, and the fact that black people don't have a culture. That's whose fault it is. Okay? That's whose fault it is. Alright? It's never his fault. It's never so much Mr. Research. It's always, okay, black people, or the fact that black people don't have a culture, or, you know what I mean? It's always something outside of him fault. Okay? Another case in point, when Mr. Research is a teenager, okay? In the 80s. He's selling drugs. He's selling dope. Okay, but it's not his fault that he's selling dope. Okay, it's Ronald Reagan's fault that he's selling dope. Okay, because according to him, the Ronald Reagan administration is who put dope on the street. Never mind the fact that cocaine was already present in America prior to the 1980s. Okay, never mind that the drugs were already present in black communities prior to the 1980s when Ronald Reagan was the president. Never mind that. Okay, but when Mr. Research sold drugs, okay, when Mr. Research sold drugs, all right, in the 1980s, it was Ronald Reagan's fault. Okay, it wasn't his fault. So you have to ask the question: is anything his fault? Is there ever anything that's Mr. Researcher's fault, or is everything just always other people's fault? See what I'm saying? That's the question you have to ask. All right, that's the question you have to ask. Okay, and what it is Mr. Research. He does not ask those questions. He doesn't. He just says, "Well, you know what? You know what I mean?" He just says, "Well, you know what? It was Ronald Reagan's fault. That's why I sold drugs. It was Ronald Reagan's fault in the 1980s, and that's why I sold drugs. It wasn't my fault. It's never my fault. It's always Ronald Reagan's fault. It's somebody else outside of me." And you have to think, what kind of mindset does a person like that have to have? Is it narcissism? I'm starting to think Mr. Research has like a some sort of mild form of narcissism or something like that. Because whenever he speaks about things, it's never his fault. It's always somebody else's fault. It's always somebody else's fault. And it's like, damn, you get tired of hearing that shit a lot of times. That's why I've kind of stopped fucking with him, because he portrays himself like he's this upwardly mobile, you know, successful black man and all that, and that's not really what he is. Okay, he may be successful in his own right, or in his own world, or in his own mind to an extent. Okay, he may be successful in that he has a job and he, has his own place or whatnot. Okay, maybe he got a little bit of real estate to the side, whatnot. Okay, but he's not personally successful in the sense that this guy blames people. Okay, for things. He blames people for things. All right, and he never blames himself. He never blames himself. Okay, it's always somebody else's fault, and I don't rock with that. You know what I mean? I don't rock with that. I'm just not that type of guy to rock with that. Okay, I can't rock with people who are not self-reflective, who refuse to look at themselves and say, okay, what are some possible things that I personally may be doing wrong? What are some possible things? And see, with the Atlanta thing, Atlanta is one of the number one cities for fraternities. Okay. Mr. Research never mentions that. He never mentions that. When you go to Atlanta, all right? All right. When you go to Atlanta, if you're not involved, okay, with the schools there, or you're not involved with the fraternities there, it can be very hard to move socially there because Atlanta is an old black boule city. You have a lot of influential, old, wealthy black families that have been around since the end of the Civil War in Atlanta. Those people have been there since the end of the Civil War. That's their city. When you go to Atlanta, you are a guest in their city. You got to prove yourself to them if you want to get on. And he didn't do that. He felt. See, Mr. Research was operating from this naive thing that he has in his head, where it's the weirdest thing because Mr. Research has like this thing in his head where he believes, well, I'm a black man and I'm in a chocolate city like Atlanta. So therefore the black people there should just embrace me. Okay? Cuz I'm a black man in a chocolate city. And they should just embrace me. Like there should be no qualifications, that there should be no, no, or how should I say it? No vetting process or anything like that. I shouldn't have to walk around or shake anybody's hand or try to get to know anybody or convince anybody or anything like that. I shouldn't have to do that. I'm a black man and I should just be able to show up and get what the fuck I want from these people. And these people just supposed to move in my favor. You see what I'm saying? You see what I'm saying? They just supposed to move in my favor. They just supposed to move in my favor and everything is just supposed to go, okay? Everything just supposed to go in my favor. And all I got to do is show up. And it don't work like that. He didn't take any of those factors into account. Okay? So when it didn't work like that, instead of him going back to the drawing board and being self-reflective, it's like, okay, I'm a black man and it didn't work out for me, so therefore black people don't have a culture. That's the reason it didn't work out for me, because black people don't have a culture. That's the reason it didn't. He says nothing about, you know, nothing about himself. The whole time is this. It's always okay. They didn't have a culture. It's not my fault. It's their fault. Okay. It's not my fault. It's their fault because they didn't have a culture. All right, and y'all know how I feel about that. I don't like that. I don't like the constant blaming of other people and blaming and okay. Okay. I don't like that. It shows an immaturity. And it even shows in a lot of ways, okay? In a lot of ways, it even shows that this guy is kind of almost like a situational dyslexic because he'll be in situations and don't even realize what's going on. You know, he'll be he'll be somewhere and something will happen. He don't even realize what the fuck is happening. You know what I mean? I'd be like, what? Like, how does this guy not realize what's going on around? How is he not aware of what's going on around him? Okay. Because I'll be like, what is this guy doing? You know, what is this guy up to? How does he not realize, you know, what's going on? Okay, he's an articulate guy. It's not that he's not smart. He's an articulate guy, but for some reason he don't get certain things. Like with him, he like the things that go on, and he don't seem to get it. I mean, he don't seem to understand or be able to look and say, okay, this is happening, or that's happening. Okay, and with Mr. Research, that doesn't happen. It's just like, okay, he goes somewhere and things don't work out, and he's looking around. He's like he's fumbling around. He's trying to blame something, trying to blame, trying to look to see what's going on, but he will not blame. Something in him keeps him from blaming himself, and I think that's the narcissism. That's the narcissism of it. Is something in this guy keeps him from blaming himself, keeps him from looking at himself and always looking at others. And as an adult, as a mature adult, you can't do that. You can't always look at others. You have to be accountable as a mature adult. See what I'm saying? You can't always look at other people. You know, can't always do that. You know, you cannot always do that. Okay, it's negative to always do that. It's very negative. It's very, and not only is it very negative, okay, you don't grow when you do that. And I think Mr. Research, he hasn't grown in all these years. Ever since he was a teenager, this guy hasn't grown. Because he always blames other people for his shit. And that's what made me realize, you know what? That's why this guy has been, his life hasn't advanced. Like what I noticed is this guy, he'll go places, he'll move to cities. He was all in Europe at one point when he was younger. He'll go to cities and he'll fail in those cities. He'll leave Oakland, California, where he's from, and he'll go to Seattle. and then he'll come back to Oakland, California. Then he'll go to Atlanta, and when he went to Atlanta, he's homeless in Atlanta, and then he got to come back to Oakland, California. This guy cannot exist outside of California. He cannot survive outside of California. I realized that. I'd be like, well, how come this guy can't make it outside of California? Why he always got to come back to California? You know what I mean? I would always, you know, I would always ask that question. This guy leaves his state, goes to other states, fails, got to come back to California. And it happens time and time and time and time again. This guy has failed time and time again. You know what I mean? And I'd be like, why? Why? And then I realized, oh, it's because this dude doesn't do any introspection. He doesn't look at himself and say, okay, what am I doing wrong? Can I improve this? Can I improve that? And then when you say anything to him about it, he jumps up and blames racism and the white man, and he'll say that he blames immigrants and the fact that there are no more labor unions. Like, that's what he blames. He never look at himself. And that turns a lot of people off. That's why a lot of people don't be going over there to his channel like that. Because a lot of people are just turned off. You know. I mean, a lot of people are turned off. And then you get to the aspect of women. Okay, with him, he says all women go left. But what does that mean? Okay, when you say all women go left, what are you really saying when you say that? Okay, are you saying that are you saying that you can't get any of these women to, do things or your way, or move or go your way? Is that what you're trying to say? Or are you saying that, or are you saying that, women are somehow just inherently flawed and they're just destined to always do unfavorable things in a given situation? What are you saying? Because you can interpret that in another way, and you can say, well, Mr. Research could be a guy who has problems with the women that he's with. He don't know how to handle the women that he's in relationships with. So therefore, all the women go left. Well, if you're gonna say that, why talk about women at all? If nothing good is gonna come of it, if they all go left, why talk about women at all? Why not talk about women? Why not just talk about other things instead of talking about women? If you're gonna say all that, you know, you know, If you're gonna say all that, that's how I feel about it. You know, if you don't have anything positive to say, you can't say anything good about these chicks. Why talk about them at all? Why not move on? Why talk about something? Why not talk about something else? Why not just move on and not deal with them? You know, you know what I mean? But that's how I feel. Because you'll never hear me sit here and speak and talk about things that I believe are unfavorable. If I think something is unfavorable, I just won't talk about it. You know, that's just how I feel. I think it's a waste of time for me to talk about things that are unfavorable towards me. And I don't think anybody want to hear me talk about things that were unfavorable towards me. Okay. But this guy, like 45, you know, damn near 44 years old plus, no women, no wife, no family, you know, so it's like, why are you talking about women? You at the age, man, you ain't gonna, you ain't gonna meet anybody at this age. So he's talking about surrogacy and all stuff like that. You know, and I'm not. I mean, to each their own. You know, but that's kind of a. It's like you got to think about this guy's gotten to a point in his life where he is considering surrogacy. He has no choice but surrogacy. You know what I mean? He gonna have to go the route of surrogacy because he was never able to find a woman he could deal with or that could tolerate him. You know. So he has to go the route of surrogacy. And that's crazy when you think about it. I mean, that's crazy when you think about it. You know, that's crazy when you think about it. Okay, so this guy, you know, when things go wrong, it's not his fault, it's other people's fault, or he blames whole groups of people and says that whole groups of people have a flaw because something didn't work out with him, for him. He moves around, goes to different states and cities and stuff and fails, and then blames it on the culture and it's instead of him. I think there's a certain level of narcissism going on there with Mr. Research. And everything with him is victim mindset. Like it's I've never seen he's supposed to be a big, you know, big old, you know, black dude, but I've never seen a guy like him go around and be a victim as much as him. It's insane. It's crazy. I've never seen somebody be that much of a victim like all the time like that. And it's actually annoying. Like, how can anybody deal with this guy? I mean, that's how I'd be like. I'd be like, how can anybody in their right mind deal with this dude? Because this dude is crazy. He blames everybody for everything. You know, and it's never his fault. It's it's never his fault. It's always somebody else's fault. Okay, and then the whole child support thing. Now, Arthur Clarke made a video about Mr. Research. Arthur Clarke said Mr. Research talks about child support. Mr. Research doesn't even have kids, but he talks about child support. Now, he claimed that there was some women years and years ago that used his name as like the father of record in the state of Seattle. So she ended up putting like a child support case on him. But then he blames himself for allowing this chick access to do that. I'm like, how did you allow her access to do that? How do you allow anybody access to your information to do something like that? I don't make no sense. I mean, how you allow anybody to do some shit like that to you? You know. But somehow, when Mr. Research, he let this thing happen. And whenever he tells this story as like a worst case scenario of what goes down in like child support cases. Like he tells it like this big, worst case scenario thing. I mean, that's how he tells the story. And he'll sit there and he'll say, "Well, nobody has paid at the hands of a woman more than me. Nobody, you know what I mean? Like this is what this guy says and does. You know, he'll say no. You know, you know what I mean? He'll say, well, no. I mean, he'll say, well, no man that I know has has paid at the hands of a woman more than I had. And you think about it, that it's actually very narcissistic to say some shit like that. I mean, it's actually extremely narcissistic. You know, but this is what this guy does. This is what this guy says. This is how this guy talks. You know, this is how he talks, and a lot of people have a hard time following him. Okay, and then he goes and talks about people that don't talk about him. Like he'll talk about Tommy Sotomayor. Tommy Sotomayor don't talk about him. We're talking about Tommy Sotomayor's mama used to be a preacher, and like, who cares? Like, what are you really saying at that point? Like, what's the point of talking about that? Like, what are you trying to say? Tommy Sotomayor's mom used to be Tommy grew up in an all white area in Florida, or he grew up like in an all white neighborhood or whatever in Florida. and he didn't grow up around black people like that. Well, who cares? You know what I mean? Like who gives a fuck? You know what I mean? That's his business. Who gives a fuck how he grew up? And what's the point of continuing to talk about him? You probably building up his numbers by talking about him. You don't even realize that. I mean, Mr. Research don't even realize that you building up this guy's numbers. You know, by talking about him and giving him airtime. Okay. And it goes back to the whole child support thing. Mr. Research used to be a MGTOW back in the day. He was on that MGTOW shit back in 2010. A lot of his MGTOW ideology comes from the fact that he has had failed relationships, but also from the concept and the idea that that Mr. That this guy, that Mr. Research doesn't, how should I say it? Mr. Research, he has a bad history with women. For some reason, this guy, he was never able to really get the women he wanted in his life. For some reason, I don't know why. It might be his fault. It might be his narcissism, his personality issues, the different things that he got going on. Him not able to blame himself, always blaming other people. Him always feeling like he's so qualified to give everybody else advice and stuff, but he doesn't even follow his own advice. Because if he followed his own advice, don't you think he would be more successful in relation? He's sitting up here telling other people what women or what man they should pursue, but the women that he has pursued, the both times he was engaged, it failed. So how come he never followed his own advice? You know what I mean? Mr. Research never followed his own advice for some reason. And I find that weird. I mean, I find that weird. I really do. I really do. And sometimes I wonder, like, why is this guy here? Why is he on here? Like, what is he really doing? What is he really up to? He's talking about the same stuff every video. Women going left, labor unions. Things were better back in the day when people had unions, and you ask yourself, well, why is that? Well, it's because my mommy and daddy told me that because they were in the union. Well, that's anecdote. You know what I mean? But I'm gonna say that for another video when I talk about him. You know, you know, you know. Mr. Research, He comes off as a guy, he loves to talk about other people, but he doesn't love to talk about himself. When it comes to him having to talk about himself, he do not want to do that. It's always somebody else's fault. It's Ronald Reagan's fault. It's black women's fault. It's black people don't have a culture fault. But it's never him. I have a big issue with that. I can't rock with a nigga like that. You know what I mean? I can't rock with you if you want that. You know what I mean? You know what I mean? I can't rock with you if you want that. But that being said, and see, Mr. Research, he comes from this older era in YouTube, back in the early 2010s, because even I was around back then, where the dudes were, it was even worse than it is now, where the dudes were just always talking about black women. Because see, back then you didn't have all these black guys that are, in tech, and all these black guys who talking about Bitcoin and all this other stuff. Back then, dudes would just come on and they would always talk about fucking women. They talk about women 24/7. They would complain about women 24/7. They complain about black women 24/7. Okay, talking about black women's attitudes and how mean black women were, and the black women that didn't want to go to the prom with them and all that. They would do that 24/7. And he comes out of that era where you had a lot of these little incel, unconfident dudes complain about women all the time. That's why he made the Manhood Lessons channel. And ironically, the Manhood Lessons channel was his only ever successful YouTube channel. Everything that he has done prior to that has been unsuccessful, or that he has done after that has been unsuccessful. Like this little channel that he got now, it's not successful. He go on there, talk about politics, complain about women, talk about the black community all the damn time, and nobody's listening but a handful of people. He only get like 1 or to 200 views. Nobody's really paying attention to him, but he believes he's destined to lead some kind of movement for black men and go teach these black men how to be managers on their job. Why doesn't he just set up like a job training nonprofit or something like that for that? Why do you got a grandstand on YouTube? See what I'm saying? He could help a lot more people if he actually went and got the money, started a nonprofit, and then said, okay, I'm going to bring people in, teach them work skills, teach them how to be managers. He'd be better off doing that instead of coming on YouTube, grandstanding on YouTube. Then he claimed he had some young guy, he brought some young guy onto his job and he was mentoring him. And then he said that he ended up having an issue with the guy. And then he said he caught the guy talking on the phone to his white girlfriend. Like, why is it a big deal to you who another man talks to on his phone? Like, that's weird as fuck to me. That actually made him suspect in a lot of ways. That whole story. And now that I think about it, it made him suspect in a lot of ways. Okay, it made him suspect. You know what I mean? Like, why do you give a fuck what another man do on his phone? That's his fucking phone, and when he's off, he's free to talk to whoever the fuck he wants to. It's a free country. It's not your job to criticize who a man decides he want to talk to in his spare time. It's a free country. Talk to whoever the fuck you want to talk to. Okay. Don't nobody have to approve. You know, you're not gonna sit up here and approve who other people talk to on their phone. You know, so weird stuff like that. You know what I mean? Hey, weird stuff. Weird ass shit. You know, weird ass shit. Like, well, why do you care what this dude is doing? And then if you say you want to help people, why help? Why help people one person at a time? If you had a nonprofit, you could help dozens of people at a time. And instead, you want to go and help this one guy at a time, and then come on YouTube and tell a story about it and pat yourself on the back. That's that narcissism right there. And he tell that same story over and over again. You would think he would be embarrassed to keep telling the same story, but every time he meet new people, this nigga tell that same ass story. I'm like, what the fuck? Why is this guy telling this same ass story all the fucking time? I mean, I'd be like, what the fuck? Don't nobody want to keep hearing this old same ass story. I mean, everybody don't want to hear the fucking same ass story. That shit gets annoying after a while. Come up with something original. Come up with something. At least come up with something new. You a content creator. You can come up with something new. You know, come up with something new. But he either seems unwilling or he seems unable to do that. I mean, he seems unable to do that. Okay, he sees unable to do that, and it don't make a whole lot of sense. You know, and adults are the ones who should be able. You know, adults should be able to be introspective and recognize their own mistakes. He cannot do that. That's why he has failed in multiple environments, and that's why he's never made it outside of California. He's only good in environments where he's familiar with. You know what I mean? But he never made it outside of California. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and end it out right there, guys. But definitely, I'll be talking more about this subject in the future. But let me know what y'all think. Go ahead and leave, comment, subscribe. Peace.